Hi, folks. I know we've got more and more folks tuning in. We're giving them a couple more minutes before we kick off the panel discussion, but we are at 7:02, and I am a huge proponent of starting things on time as much as we can. So we're going to start with opening remarks, and more attendees will continue trickling in as we go. So hello, I am Kylie, and I'm the founder of Chic Geek. I'm pumped to be the MC and moderator for tonight's discussion. Tonight, let me just share my screen with you, and we will walk through a couple of slides as well. All right. So tonight, we are kicking off with opening remarks, and our panel discussion will last until about 7:50 with time for audience Q&A. And after the panel, we'll be opening up roundtable discussion, encouraging all of you to put your videos on, unmute, and meet someone new. We'll be wrapping things up by 9 p.m. so that I can get to bed because that is bedtime. All right, so I'm super thrilled. Before we kind of get into the swing of things, I want to acknowledge that I and many of us are joining from beautiful Calgary today, surprise snow included. And it's important to acknowledge that we are on the territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. And whether you are joining us from Calgary or not, we respect the histories, languages, cultures of the First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada. And we are grateful for the land we are on today. Tonight's celebration event is in celebration of International Women's Day. And this year's theme is Choose to Challenge. Challenge gender bias, challenge gender inequity. And I love the thought-provoking nature of that. International Women's Day is a great way to celebrate, recognize, and reflect, but it's also important to continue that work in the remaining 364 days of the year. This is one day of celebration, and the rest is a commitment to hard work. So thank you everyone for being here and joining this discussion and celebrating with us. We hope you'll roll up your sleeves with us too. Chic Geek is proud to partner with Calgary UX on this event. And with that, I'd like to introduce Louise Berman, Community Director of Calgary UX, a group of aspiring, talented design folks that are proud to count over 1,600 members. Louise, why don't you share a few words about Calgary UX with us?
Well, what can I say? The first thing I have to say is that I'm super happy to be with you and the whole Chic Geek community. It's been a great opportunity to come together this day and celebrate Women's Day, and also bring a larger message that is part of our mission and vision, which is building a diverse community where all people and all disciplines and industries come together and create spaces of trust and innovation. And as part of what we're trying to do is we're trying to inspire meaningful connections. So basically, and the opportunity to interact in crucial conversations is a great chance for us to practice what we're trying to achieve on other spaces. And for that, I will be taking a bit of a role when it comes about the technical side of things. If somebody have technical issues, please come over to me. If somebody have other kind of issues, please, I will be happy to back you up on that side. And also another role is a kind of like a note taker and learner. I'm willing to learn from everybody that is around here. And also we have great mentors. So I'm very, very happy and lucky to be in this same space as you. And well, going back to you, Kylie, thank you very much.
Louise. I also want to share a little bit about Chic Geek. We're a nonprofit committed to building gender diversity in technology. And we believe that technology has the power to shape the world. We want women's voices to be part of shaping our future. You may notice that in some instances, Chic Geek uses women with an X. It's not a typo. As an organization that stands for gender diversity, we talk a lot about women, and we use the X as an intersectional and inclusive representation that celebrates trans, genderqueer, and non-binary individuals. We use the X as a reminder that gender identity is a spectrum, and we need to stay open-minded and welcoming. Chic Geek has been around since 2013, and we're coming out of a year of organizational transformation. We've been events-based, grassroots, and now we're looking to expand our reach across Alberta and Canada because we want to scale the impact of our work. We're rolling out Career Pathing, an initiative designed to increase career visibility for intermediate women in technology. We've learned that intermediate women are leaving the technology workforce in droves, and by providing more guidance, role models, and network supports, we believe we can better retain them. Career Pathing pulls the best parts about networking and mentorship and smashes them together. And so we facilitate those one-time 30-minute connections with other individuals who are a few steps ahead on the same career path to help women build their strategic networks and gain insight to career advancement. We're currently taking waitlist applications, and if you're interested, check out the Chic Geek website, thechicgeek.ca/career pathing. Before we dive into the panel, I want to set some intention for tonight's discussion by sharing the Chic Geek values. We believe in being brave. This means stepping outside our comfort zones, taking risks, and challenging ourselves. We believe in staying curious, and this means learning new technologies, new skills, being inquisitive, and also looking inward and being curious about yourself, who you are, and what matters to you. We believe in supporting others, and this means offering help to someone else and being willing to ask for help yourself. These values help to bookend the expectations we have of ourselves and our community. They shape our culture, how we treat each other, and most importantly, they build inclusivity and belonging. We hope that these values will guide you tonight in the way you engage with each other and with the panel. I'm so excited for this panel discussion. I'm also a really proud mom of twin girls, Lily and May, and will shamelessly share pictures whenever I can. In the big photo, they were less than a month old, and we had just taken them home from NICU. This was day 5 at home, and I had set them up on the kitchen table, pulled out my laptop, and was getting some work done. And I remember feeling so proud of myself and happy to be working. And I share this with you not to demonstrate that I'm a workaholic. Lily and May are happy kids. They get lots of attention. I share this because for many women, work and life blend together. And drawing a line between work and personal life is unrealistic. And it shuts out really important pieces of ourselves and says that they don't have a voice at the work table. The world I imagine for Lily and May, you can see they're getting bigger in the smaller picture to the left there, is one where they can bring their full selves to work, where all facets of their personalities and interests are embraced in the work they do. That's the inspiration for the panel discussion tonight. We're exploring crucial conversations that happen in our work as designers and in our life. The skills needed to have these types of conflicts are critical in being great team members, leaders, role models, partners, parents, and friends. And with that, I want to introduce our exceptional panelists tonight. Paula Blackmore White is the Manager of People Development at Benevidi. She leads a team that's responsible for helping Benevidites unleash their potential through development and learning. And her path started on a pool deck, coaching high-performance athletes and developing national-level coaches for Canada and the US in synchronized swimming. Paula's purpose is to spark aha moments in those around her, and she's done that for large brands like Lululemon and Apple. Welcome, Paula. We're happy to have you. Next, I'd like to welcome Anu Sharma Niwa. She's a registered psychologist with Heart of Communication, and she has over 20 years of clinical experience in psychotherapy and psychological assessment. Her practice focuses on individuals and couples to help them learn how to fulfill the desires of their heart in life and love. She also has a special interest in working with neurodiverse populations, specializing in those on the high functioning end of the autism spectrum. Welcome, Anu. We're happy to have you.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Next up, we have Cami Travis Groves, a transformational coach who helps creatives identify what's got them stuck, re-engage their creativity, and hone their strengths so they can become their best selves. As a recovering graphic designer herself, Cami pulls on 30 years of design experience from all types of organizations, from academia to agency, startups to international nonprofits. And I wish that Cami, I could bottle her up and carry her around in my pocket every day because that would be so helpful. Welcome, Cami. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you.
Lastly, we have Irina Belova. She's a product design manager at Clio, a Vancouver-based company on a mission to transform the practice of law for good. She's been working in design for over 15 years and is constantly working towards having more candid conversations at work and home. Welcome, Irina.
Thanks, Kelly.
Today, we're exploring crucial conversations and creating spaces to both give and receive feedback with our panel. So that leads into our first question. What ingredients create the environment for candid conversations to happen? Irina, I'd like to start with you.
Sure. I would like to... Oh, I'm getting an echo. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to approach this conversation kind of from the framework of Radical Candor, which is a book that is very dear to the heart of a lot of folks that work at Clio. And in this book, the author Kim Scott frames Radical Candor and these kinds of crucial conversations as existing along two axes. And these axes are kind of important factors that really need to exist for these conversations to occur. And the first one is challenging directly. So basically caring enough in order to give this kind of feedback and to start these conversations. But the one that I kind of want to focus on, which is the other axis, it's caring personally, which I think is really critical. And I think we all kind of need to spend the time to care about each other and to show each other that we care in order for these conversations to go, I'm not going to say smoothly, but to be productive.
Irina, I really like that, and using the Radical Candor framework. Paula, I know that you come from a slightly different framework, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the Radical Candor framework. I think it's a great one. I think one of the things that I really think about when you're having a difficult conversation or when you're about to go have a difficult conversation is really that self-awareness piece, really knowing yourself, really knowing what it is that you want to say, and a little bit of that Radical Candor piece with the specificity. I often ask leaders, at what point is a room messy? And, you know, we all have an opinion on that. And I guarantee we have not discussion about it with the other people in our lives. And a room can be many things. At what point is the work not good enough? At what point is, you know, are you late? All of that type of stuff. And so really getting clear on yourself on what it is that you want to say, and then being able to manage yourself in doing that. So really knowing, you know, knowing the other person and knowing yourself as you approach this conversation, I think is just hugely important.
Cool. Paula, I think we're going to come back to that a couple times in the conversation about what is knowing yourself. Cami, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, it's important, like what Paula said, it's really important to know your defaults. so that when you go into a conversation, if somebody's going to trigger you, what are your defaults? If you're not sure, just ask someone who knows you, ask a family member. Are you a hothead? Do you clam up? Do you take things personally? Do you overshare? What are your defaults? That's a key part of the self-awareness, that if you already know how your default behavior is going to show up, you can manage it much easier.
Cami, when you say default, does that mean how you are under pressure? Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah,
absolutely.
Anu, what are your thoughts here in terms of what we need to create environments for candid conversations to happen?
Oh, I love what all of the panelists are saying. And to build on that, I love knowing yourself. And, Harriet Lerner's quote is, that stands out for me is, listen in the way that you desire to be heard. And I feel like that's an important piece with candid conversations. And I draw from a lot of relationship work. So, for example, the Gottman Institute really talks a lot about sharing fondness and admiration. And if we can build the positive in a 5-to-1 ratio, 5 positives to buffer 1 negative, that makes a huge difference, because our ability to notice and express fondness and admiration can build such a culture of appreciation. It's a positive habit of mind just to notice in others' contributions, instead of focusing and filtering out all of the positive and only focusing on the negative, because we do like to do that. Our brain does gravitate to the negative, that negative bias, and we like to dig into that. We have more words for what's negative. So it does require much more critical, candid conversations with ourselves as well to buffer that for ourselves and for others.
I love that analogy, that 5-to-1 ratio. It's like putting money in the goodwill piggy bank, so that when you need to have a tough conversation, you can take that goodwill out. Anu, now you mentioned appreciation, feeling appreciated in conversation. Can you just talk a little bit about how the love languages can support that? Because that's also a really interesting framework.
Hugely. So the love languages, the 5 love languages, comes from Gary Chapman's work. You can do a quiz online via his website, and it's free. And it looks like it's so simple. It looks like it belongs in a magazine. Research went into it. Quality time, receiving gifts.
Uh-oh. Oh no.
Anu, oh no, we're losing you. Anu, oh, are you still here, Anu? Your connection might be a tad spotty. You could try turning off your video, or if you need to pop in, find a better connection and come back. Yeah, she's frozen again. Louise, would you mind messaging Anu separately in case she needs any technical support?
Can you hear me now, guys?
Sure, I will follow up.
We can hear you. Well, hopefully.
Can you hear me now?
Hopefully there will be no more freezing, but we were having a bit of an. Okay, though, we'll keep going. We lost.
I'm sure that we can circle back to the love languages, since that's so important.
Yes.
It's not a virtual event unless somebody has a Wi-Fi issue.
Yeah, exactly.
Anu, I'm going to ask you to pop out and then pop back in. Louise, it's pretty spotty. Yeah, so we're going to continue the conversation. We're going to come back to the love languages because that is a really interesting one. But Louise, if you could be available to help Anu, that would be amazing. Thank you. Okay, that was a really powerful first question. There were so many resources that have already been shared, from radical candor, fierce conversations, the 5-to-1 ratio, love languages, things for the audience to look into, because there's a lot of learning to do there. I want to talk about, we're having this conversation online. Most of our work is happening online these days. Many of our personal relationships have also moved online. Is having crucial conversations different online, and how can we have them well. Paula, why don't you start us off here?
For sure. I mean, let's be honest, everything's different online, but I do think that you can have amazing conversations online and amazing connections. It just takes a little bit more intentionality. It takes thoughtfulness, a little bit more preparation, a little bit more practice even. I don't know about the rest of you, but when we went fully online, and I do work for a tech company, but when we went fully online, I think I spent the first 3 weeks like wondering if my hair actually looked like that. I was like hard to focus on anything else. And so like now I'm over that. Okay, I got it. My hair looks like that. But I have to approach things with an intentionality. I have teammates who I've never met in 3D. And so you have to build that relationship. I love a new ratio of 5 to 1. I call it the karma piggy bank. And so you have to build that relationship. And again, that specificity is important, not saying like, hey, Cami, high fives, that was great. It's like being specific. It's like, hey, this point was really excellently done. Thank you. And so I think it's just really being intentional. And then if you're on the receiving end, communication is a two-way street. Being an audience is, this is a bit of a weird scenario here because I can only see my fellow panelists. But in an audience, pro tip, the speakers can see you. And in a conversation, the other person can see you. So if you're on the receiving end of feedback, I'm getting a lot of verbal cues right now from my panelists and from Kylie, getting the extra head nod instead of just like the tiny little head nod. When you're looking at tiny little tiles, that really helps. So it's a two-way street. It kind of takes two to tango.
Irina, what do you think about being intentional?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Paula, and I think I would add to what she said and say, I think, it's really easy now that we're on Zoom, because I think previously, before the pandemic, we would get on Zoom when we had to. It wasn't, so we would get into the Zoom, do what we needed to do, make the choices and decisions we needed to make together, and then bail. So I think it's really important to make the space and maybe even schedule an extra 10 minutes just to connect with each other at the beginning of every meeting, just to build that trust and build that relationship, because it's really important. And I think, we kind of complain about having to do this, but I think it's kind of cool, the fact that like the 5 of us, for example, are now coming together from our own spaces, and we can see what life is like for each of us, which I think is an element of vulnerability that I really like, and I think actually makes that trust building a little bit easier in a way. So yeah, I would kind of say just lean into that and make the most of it.
Cami, do you want to jump in there?
Everything Irina said, yes. No, we have the opportunity to. There's a physical aspect absent, of course, but we have the ability to, like on a phone call, we get a little bit deeper in phone calls. We get a little bit deeper in texts than we are sometimes on first meeting with people in real life. So we can lean into that discomfort and grow a little bit. Take the opportunity, lean into it just a little, not completely abandon our comfort zone, but just a little, and see what happens. That's where that bravery that you were talking about earlier, Kylie, comes in.
Thank you, Cami. And, that leaning in, it takes a commitment. And sometimes, building those relationships online does come a little easier. Do you also think that they're easier to break online?
They're fragile. They are very fragile. And I just thought of something as you were beginning to say that. It's lost, senior moment. This is all we get. We don't have all of the body language, and frustration can, we think, if I can just make it through this Zoom call and nobody will know I'm frustrated, but we can see you. We know when we're frustrated. It's much better to get all that out. Vulnerable conversations.
Thank you, Cami. That's good. And I think that
hopefully you caught all that.
Yes. That ties in. Anu, we were just talking about how crucial conversations happen online. What can we do to make them easier? Do you have anything that you might like to share there?
Make sure my kids are not taking my bandwidth Wi-Fi. That's a great one. I'm so sorry, everyone, for that.
It happens.
So that was the key one. But aside from bandwidth, body language I feel is huge. Making that eye contact, leaning in as opposed to being far back and distant. It's a bit more engaging. The nonverbals, the nodding, the engagement. I'm a big hand talker, and I don't know if that's distracting sometimes, but it really helps me engage, I feel. So I think body language is huge.
I love that. And that really connects to Paula's point about the importance of, how you show up matters. Because I think sometimes when we're in the audience or we're not kind of the keynote speaker, it's easy to think about like, what does my thinking face look like? Mine looks like this, and it's like my eyebrows are furrowed and I look pretty angry. And I need to be really conscious of it, because for someone speaking like that looks really intimidating. So how we show up as audiences and listeners also really matters, especially online. So thank you, panelists, for that advice. Anu, we had lost you originally when we were coming into the love languages, but I do want, if you could share those with us from the top, that would be really helpful, and we might come back to it in the conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so where did I cut off? Was I just listing the love languages?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's words of affirmation, there's acts of service, physical touch, quality time, receiving gifts. And what I was beginning to kind of dive into was that we love all of them. We actually enjoy all of them, but we tend to feel loved and plugged in by one or two of them. And so what Gary Chapman talks a lot about in his work is that love is many things, but it's also a choice, primarily a choice. And what we do as human beings is that we typically tend to counterintuitively show and express our love and our care for others in the way that we want to receive it. So I'm high on words of affirmation. And so I notice that I have a tendency to be heavy on words of affirmation with my husband. And he likes it, he appreciates it, but it's not what makes him feel loved and plugged in. So I have to be very mindful to be turning towards him with physical touch or acts of service. That's how he's feeling loved and plugged in. And but it's work for me. It's habit changing work. And likewise, he's turning towards it. He, when I met him, he's like, oh, I'm not a words guy. I'm like, oh, it's not a personality trait to be a words person. So it's just a choice, and you cultivate these habits of turning towards. And so and it's very valuable. And so of course, in a workplace environment, you have to have some boundaries. But in our personal relationships, and as that continuum kind of gets closer and closer with intimacy, it's so crucial, so crucial.
And understanding the love languages, I think, can help with those feelings of appreciation, which we kind of started to touch on in the first question. Thank you, Anu, for sharing that with us. I think that's something for all of us to kind of look into a little bit more and use as a framework in our toolbox as well. I want to know about your last experience having a candid conversation that happened at work or at home. Maybe it was a really tough one to get through. I'm hoping you can share that journey with the audience tonight. Paula, can you kick us off?
Of course. Yeah, about a month ago, I noticed, so we use Slack, and for just some context in case there's anybody in the audience who's not aware of Slack, think of it kind of like WhatsApp, but on steroids, and you use it at work. And so, so we use Slack quite heavily, and I noticed that a leader had posted a celebration about their team on one of the channels. And very quickly afterwards, another leader kind of did a bigger celebration about their team on the channel. And I noticed it at the time for a couple of reasons, because I was like, oh, that didn't necessarily feel good. But I also noticed it because the first leader was a female and the second leader was a male. And I was like, I should say something because I know both leaders and I know the male leader did not intend this. And I got busy and I didn't say anything. And about a week later, I heard kind of through the rumor mill, people talking about this. And I realized that by not sharing this with the male leader, I had not allowed him to have that moment where he could see what had happened and to decide what to do. And so I slacked him, and I asked, you know, are you a writing feedback type person? You know, I've got an observation. Would you like me to like send it to you and then we can talk about it, or do you want me to like book some time? And so we ended up talking, and he, you know, and I just shared. I was like, this is what I observed. I'm not sure, you know, if you realize the impact of what you did. And this leader, you know, like people are so smart, and immediately he just said, he's like, I thought about it after I posted, and I thought I probably should go talk to that other leader. Like, I'm gonna go talk to her. And so that's what he did. And, you know, it's like, it's worked out perfectly. And it was just this moment, it's, you know, I just had this moment of showing him, you know, an observation I had, you know, it wasn't, I had no judgment on it. It was just an observation I had. And, you know, he made a choice based off of that, and it worked out really well. But yeah, it's you know, in the hindsight, you're looking at it, you're like, that's kind of an awkward conversation to have. But if I didn't, so many other awkward conversations would have to happen, like mistrust would build, or resentment, or those other things that you still have to deal with at some point in time. So having that first conversation sometimes actually easier, no matter how hard it looks.
Paula, are there any risks if you wait too long to have that conversation? Like you know, you mentioned you got busy and it happened a week later. Is there a time when that window closes?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know why, but that kind of old proverb of like, the best time to plant an oak tree was 20 years ago, the next best time is right now, comes to mind. I think maybe if I racked my brain, I could come up with like a reason to like, you know, where it wouldn't, where, you know, but I think yeah, I would have the conversation.
Yeah, you know what's really interesting is that research from the Gottman Institute speaks to that. They've actually narrowed it down through 45 years of research based on couples, that it's best to wait, you know, at least 30 minutes just to kind of breathe and make sure that you've processed it, but to not wait longer than 24 hours to invite a repair or a candid conversation, which I think makes a lot of sense as I reflect back onto some of my tougher conversations or moments of conflict, that it is better when you can circle back and have that conversation within 24 hours, because the reasoning behind it is that it can build up resentment and that emotional scar tissue.
I love that, Anu. And with that, you know, do you maybe want to share your last crucial conversation?
Yeah, I had one in my personal world. And, you know, in my personal world, I'm wearing my mom hat. I'm wearing my, you know, neighbor hat. And, you know, with my son, who's only 10, he was just kind of going through this relationship dynamic with one of his friends, and it was becoming a power dynamic. And it was just happening repetitively over time, kind of cusping onto bullying. And I thought, well, I need to nip this in the bud. Not wearing my psychologist hat. I forget about that when I'm in my personal world, to be quite honest. And so I had a candid conversation with this boy's mom, who I knew, great family, great boy. But I was using what I thought was all of the tools and all of the strategies, using my I statements. And I kind of went in thinking, yeah, this is going great. We're going to nip this in the bud. We're going to solve this. And she froze, and she became very frosty with me. And I thought, oh, that didn't go the way I expected it to go. It's like, you know, went home and I thought, oh, I just don't feel good about this. I don't, you know, this is a solvable problem. These kids are great little humans. They're going to be fine. It's kind of part of growing up. And so I circled back to her. I thought it's really important that I dive into my own vulnerability and take that courage to circle back and say, I didn't feel really great about how that conversation went. And I just want to, you know, check in with you just to see. I want to reassure you that I think your family is great, and you've got this great tiny human. And it turned out that it wasn't anything of that. It was just that there was more that was going on in her personal world. And there's that saying that, you know, we have to be aware of what's, you know, that there's so much going on for people. But what I didn't actually think about was that she was feeling very vulnerable and uncomfortable because of what I do for work. She was looking at me with my psychologist hat on, and I wasn't aware of that. I wasn't aware of the power in that moment that holds. And I need to be really aware of that, aware of myself, like it was mentioned earlier by our panel. It was so important. And so we had a really great conversation where we dove into vulnerability and just into our humanness around, you know, how we want to, you know, help shape these children who don't have the frontal lobe development to navigate on their own, and then kind of have them launch into their own. But it was just a really important repair to circle back to. And it wouldn't have even occurred to me that she would have been feeling uncomfortable because I'm having this conversation around relationships with our children, and that's my specialty. So I just need to be really aware of that, and having that candid conversation with her back from a repair standpoint within 24 hours was really helpful.
Wow, that's a great story, Anu. And I like how, you know, it shows that sometimes we go in thinking that the conversation is great and it's completely opposite on the other end. That's a good reminder that we all go through that. And also to keep in mind the power dynamic, which is something that we can't see, touch, or hear, but it is felt. And so that's a really good reminder for us to kind of just keep in mind when we're having these crucial conversations. Irina, what's your story today?
My story is also a personal one, and it's one where I made like quite a mess of, I would say. It was a conversation with my partner. It was about, we were talking about, well, I wanted to talk about marriage, and it took me forever to bring it up. I was completely anxious in the lead up. And as I was like trying to engage in this discussion, I felt like physical reaction in my body. Like, I don't know, my palms were sweaty and like my heart was pounding to the point where I actually had to say, like, we might need to revisit this another time. And yeah, I think it was a good reminder for me that, you know, this process and these tools that we build up and learn, you know, where we'll use them in some situations, and sometimes they won't work for us, and it's a journey, and I don't think you ever get to the destination. And yeah, it's a constant lesson in how to approach these conversations.
Thank you, Irina. I think sometimes the stories that are closest to our hearts are like the most scary to share, and that one, when you were sharing it, I could feel like my heart palpitating, like my hands are sweaty. So thank you for being so vulnerable and raw with us. I think about the feelings that are connected to having tough conversations, especially around giving and receiving feedback. And, you know, I think about moments when I've been called in for feedback and it's like, I feel so small and scared and nervous. And so I want to know, you know, what can we do to mentally prepare ourselves to receive feedback? Cami, do you want to kick us off on this one?
No. No, I was the absolute worst at receiving any kind of feedback. I once took a personality test called the Predictive Index. The government uses it to place you with appropriate managers who can motivate you, and it basically says what motivates you the most. And whether it's you're self-driven, you respond to positive feedback, you're process-driven, or you're rules-driven. And no combinations were covered. And I raised my hand and I said, "Hey, what about this combination?" And he said, "What's yours?" I said, "I'm off the charts for self-motivated. I'm in between for positive feedback, in between for process, and I really don't care about other people's rules." And he said, "Oh, you're what we call a pain in the ass to manage." And I said, "I beg your pardon, I am not." He said, "Let me guess, you've had a string of really bad managers, haven't you?" And I went, "Oh, crap, it's me, isn't it?" So again, kind of circling back to that self-awareness piece, knowing that I really don't like it when people tell me I have to do things a certain way, or the way things have always been done, or that anything that I'm doing isn't just right. I take it really personally. And the giving of feedback, like Anu was saying, the 5-to-1 love sandwich, I think it was a love sandwich, that one little negative thing is what people are going to remember. You think about the last time you had a performance review, like this was great, and this was great, and this was great, this was great, this was great, but can you work on this? And you go home thinking, oh, I really suck at that one thing, when it's really, this is great, this is great, this is great. And the higher that ratio, the better. I've totally gotten lost in the blathering. So take it away, ladies.
Irina, do you want to share anything about, you know, how can we prepare ourselves to receive feedback that kind of builds on what Cami was saying?
Yeah, something that's kind of been on my mind lately is how can we maybe approach receiving feedback with a bit more agency and a bit more power ourselves. And I saw a tweet recently, which I really love, which is feedback is a gift. Some gifts may be returned. Feedback is an opinion, and not all of those are good. Why should I care about that? Is a perfectly valid response when receiving feedback. And, you know, it doesn't have to be confrontational, but I think like taking Cami's situation, like say you're in a performance review and there's that one thing that you need to work on, examine it, you know, take that gift of feedback and look at it from every angle and understand, okay, what exactly does this look like? Is this going to serve me to accept it? Or, you know, can I just put it back on the shelf and think about the 5 things that I'm great at? I think, yeah, we have the power to accept or not feedback.
I love that. And as someone who's sensitive, I'm like, oh, I need to just remember that a little bit more. So, I mean, receiving feedback is one side, but giving feedback is the other. And that is also not an easy thing to do. I've also been in that situation, and it is nerve-wracking and scary and stressful. So, Anu, do you have any insight on how we can prepare ourselves to give feedback?
To give feedback, well, I think giving and receiving feedback requires being able to kind of get into our vulnerability and rumble with the feelings that come up. You know, showing our humanness is so important, and connecting, really displaying how much we care about the other person through, you know, just really, I don't know, taking that courage just to be in that moment. And sometimes there can be fear that can show up. Using that 5-to-1 ratio is helpful, but I feel like courage and fear are not exclusive from one another. They're not mutually exclusive at all. They can show up simultaneously. And it's really, really important that when we're giving feedback, that we're showing our vulnerability as much as allowing ourselves to be in that vulnerability with receiving it.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Anu. Paula, do you have anything to add about how we can prepare ourselves to give feedback?
Absolutely. This is probably the old swim coach in me, but you know, practice does not make perfect, but practice makes you a heck of a lot better. And none of us rolled into the world being like, I am the world's gift to feedback. That's not happened. And so I think really taking the time to practice, and that's not to say that you just need to go around and find a bunch of people to give feedback to. I mean, having the discipline to probably go old school and like, I don't have a pen with me, but like, you know, pick up a pen and some paper and actually write out what it is that you want to say to the other person. It really helps ground your brain. You kind of move out of that critter brain and into like the really good juicy part of your prefrontal cortex. It's part of that self-awareness and that self-management piece. You can take a lot of the heat off of it. If you write it down, you get to do the 30 minutes of like pause that Anu shared with us all, because you're going to actually have to write and go old school analog style. And I think developing that practice of preparing is so important. And it's something we develop with our leaders at Benevidi. It's just, you need to practice doing this. And if you dust it off once a year for performance reviews, or for like, you know, that like Thanksgiving dinner you're going to have with your family and you wanted to share that one piece of feedback, it's going to go about as well as like that turkey that you bake once a year. So doing it on a regular basis will really help, and having that practice will really help.
So many good analogies in there, Paula. Thank you. I like that commitment to practice. Audiences, as you're listening, if what the panelists are saying triggers any questions for you, please feel free to pop it in the chat. I'll be monitoring, and then we'll go to those questions once we've wrapped up with the official kind of panel discussion to make sure that we can kind of engage your questions with the panelists as well. Paula, you know, you kind of touched on sometimes, you know, these conversations can lead to conflict. You know, to Anu's point, not all of them go super smoothly. Sometimes, you know, conflict does arise. And, you know, as designers, conflict can come up between, you know, clients, designers, managers, team members. Conflict comes up between partners, friends, kids. So I'd really like to know, Cami, I'll start with you, if you have any advice on how to diffuse those high emotional situations.
Did you call on me? Because the internet just went buggy.
Yes, over to you, Cami.
Sorry. The first thing to remember in situations where you're presenting something and someone doesn't like it is to remember that it's not you, that it's not personal, that your work is separate from you. And when emotions get high, it's hard to remember those kind of things. But the first thing, I have a fail-proof 3-step method. I've taught workshops on this. The first thing is to identify the emotions that you see flying around, including your own. And it's really important to include your own. I like to just start people practicing with, you sound frustrated. I'm frustrated too. Just acknowledging it. Frustration is a good catch-all. You're not accusing anyone of anything. You're not flying off the handle. Frustration is, that's a small, manageable thing. The second thing is you restate the issues. It sounds like you want X, Y, and Z to happen. I would like A, B, and C to happen. And if you're wrong, they'll say, no, that's not the issue. That's not the issue at all. And then you can say, you re-clarify. All right, I can understand the frustration. I'm frustrated. What you really want is X, Y, and Z, and I want A, B, C, whatever. And then the third step is to ask for a solution. And I stress those 2 words on purpose. Asking is crucial and solution is crucial. You never say compromise. How do you feel if somebody says, we got to compromise? You're like, I got to give something up. So if you say, what's a solution that we can both live with? You're inviting the person on your side of the table, and the problem is something then you both work on together. Okay. If emotions are just like off the charts, and if you said, look, you're frustrated, I'm frustrated, you want this to happen and I want this to happen, and the solution that we both can live with is not obvious to you, or not obvious to us, excuse me, I'm gonna just take a time out. And and I know Anu is going to talk about this in a minute, that when you feel flooded, and I love that word, that you can't think straight, that your emotion, your heart's beating, your palms are sweaty, you're too invested in the middle of it, that's when you step back and you take those breaks. But again, it's identify the emotion, restate the issues, and then you're asking for a solution. You're inviting them to work on the issue with you. I have had it work with an irate contractor who is yelling at me in my bathroom. I've had it work with my 5-year-old and 7-year-old kids. I've had it work as the in-between person when my 2 bosses, one person said, make the logo bigger. Have we ever heard that before? And the other person said, we want the name of the meeting bigger so that people know what it is. And they were back and forth. And as the graphic designer, I was stuck in the middle, and the lowly designer called the meeting with the directors and said, you want this to happen and you want this to happen. I'm frustrated because I'm stuck in the middle. You guys are frustrated because you both want your way. Whatever you guys decide on, whatever you both agree on, I will be happy to implement. And then I just let them duke it out. It works whether you're in the middle or you're one of the participants. But then if you're flooded, then Anu, what advice can you give there?
Yeah, that's when your heart rate is going like crazy. Your muscles are tight and constricted, and your thoughts are swimming. What happens in our brain, and I'll explain that in a minute, we're not able to actually even be present, to actively hear, to listen. Because if this is your brainstem, your limbic system gets activated, it hijacks your amygdala, that emotional part of your brain, and it flips up your prefrontal cortex axis. So your brain actually doesn't have access to that part anymore. You're in fight, flight, or freeze. And our prefrontal cortex is all about planning, problem solving, perspective taking. And if you don't have access to that, you just can't participate in the meeting. This is where that saying, flip your lid, comes from. And so we call that flooding. That term actually comes also from the Gottman research. And it's when your heart rate's well above 85 beats per minute. You're in what we call diffuse psychological arousal. When you're super tsunami flooded, your heart rate's above 170 from their research. We just don't have access to that part of our brain. We need to take that time out for at least 30 minutes to breathe. When we breathe and take that time out and refocus, change the focus of our attention, especially if our brain is stuck in gear on the thought or vilifying the other person. How could she say this? How could he say that? How could they do this? Then we need to change the focus of your attention. You need to breathe, squirt that GABA on that limbic system with your breathing, get that amygdala back in, and you get your access to your prefrontal cortex. And you know you're ready to return back to that conversation when you start having those higher level questions, kind of like, what just happened there? Why was my reaction like that? Or, wow, my reaction was out of proportion to the situation. What's happening here? What do I need to do? How do I circle back? How do I navigate this? And that's really important. But sometimes it's hard to get that lid back on. And that's where refocusing techniques are huge, like saying the alphabet backwards from Z to A. Powerful refocus. It requires all of your faculties to be used all at once. There's just no room for the negative thought. But simultaneously with breathing, you get that GABA flowing and your lid is going to be accessed soon. And you're going to be able to hear and listen.
Anu, thank you so much for bringing it to the physical and paying attention to our bodies. Also the trick of counting backwards, the alphabet. I actually don't even know that I could do it when I'm not flooded. So
hard.
Thank you, Anu. Irina, do you have any other, frameworks that are helpful to diffuse high emotional situations that you've used?
Yeah. First of all, I want to say, in order for me to count, to say the alphabet backwards, I need to literally say the alphabet until like the letter that I want. And anyway, yeah. So
Yes.
my tool is more for the moment when maybe you have some feedback to give, and you like maybe it's something that has been on your mind for a little while, and there's an emotional element woven through the feedback. It's a tool that I really love called the Experience Cube. I think once you kind of get familiar with it, you can probably use it in the moment, but it's more something that you kind of prep in advance. And what I like about it is there's 4 aspects to it, and each step kind of helps to take apart the feedback into layers. So the first one, which I think is the most crucial, is explaining the situation as if a security camera is watching. And this will take you a little while because you will constantly add your own interpretation to this explanation. So I might say, Cami said this awful thing to me. It's like, well, a security camera would not be saying that the thing that she said was awful. It would just say, Cami said this thing. And then the next step is getting clear around what you think about the situation and what you feel about that situation, which can really help you get curious with the person that you're delivering the feedback to. You can say, like, this is what I think and feel about this. Is that kind of how you see it? Is there something else? Like, it rather than kind of starting from this emotional place, you can kind of unpack it into objective observation, what I think and feel, and then you always end with, and this is what I want. So you always end with that ask for the other person to wrap up. And yeah, I think it takes a few cycles to actually clarify those 4 aspects, but I think it's very effective to plan delivering feedback.
Very cool. I haven't heard of that one, Irina, but one that I definitely want to try. Paula, do you have anything else to add on diffusing high emotional situations?
Yeah, a few years ago, I was at Folk Fest, and just in case anybody's not joining from Calgary or Alberta, Folk Fest is just exactly what it sounds. It's a folk music festival in Calgary. And there was an artist on stage, and he was having problems with his guitar. Very similar to our Wi-Fi issues that we all get to go through with Zoom nowadays. And it just wasn't working, and there was problems, and he called somebody over, and nobody, and then he's like, oh, and he plugs a cord into his guitar, and he says, as with most things in life, I find I am the problem. And this maybe is bringing us back to full circle to where I started, but I think that really coming back to that self and that self-management, that self-awareness. At what point was that room messy? Like, are you getting upset and are you getting flooded because you were not specific beforehand and you can't be specific right now? we don't think and then feel, we feel and then we think, to a news point. And so can you breathe and actually, your grandma said to count to 10, like grandma wasn't wrong. These are silly little tricks, but like they work. Like you don't need to reinvent the wheel here. It's so simple, the alphabet thing, breathing, taking a walk around the block. Like these are all really tried and true strategies. If you're hungry, go eat something. You're probably dehydrated, go have some water. These are things that can really help with diffusing that situation, because you're not going to diffuse it if you're ready to meet, if you're ready to meet the situation. If it's kind of like you're ready to blow, the situation's going to blow.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about some of my own situations where I've been ready to blow, and it's never a good feeling, even after. There's always a lot of regret.
And usually what's going on out here is a direct reflection of what's going on in here.
That's a good one, Cami. Thank you. Audience, I do want to open it up for questions, and I challenge you to be brave tonight. Put your questions in the chat. Stay curious. I hope that this discussion has spurred some questions and inquisitiveness for you. We will have 10 more minutes of the discussion for questions right now, actually. But if I don't see any coming through the chat, then I will pull out a couple more questions, and we'll continue this discussion until about 8:10. So please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll be looking for them. And while we're waiting for those to come in, we've talked about some really interesting things tonight, and I'm feeling a little bit like, we've gone through the ups and downs of giving and sharing feedback. Like I'm feeling a little bit emotionally tired already. So, I think emotional hangovers can happen frequently, especially in high conflict and high emotional conversations. Wondering if the panel has any advice on how to self-manage our own emotional hangovers. Anu, do you want to start us off there?
Sure. I think one of the most important things with an emotional hangover is to discern between shame and guilt. This comes a lot, stems a lot from Brené Brown's work, that guilt is, I've made a bad choice and I feel badly about it. It's externalized from who you are. It's an action that can be repaired. Shame is much more insidious. The meaning of shame ultimately ties to your worth. It's basically saying you're not worthy of that love, that connection, that belonging. And so it's much more insidious because it goes down and digs into our worth, our mental health, our physical health, and we can get into some pretty big shame spirals. So to recognize when shame shows up and to take that step back and say, but wait a minute, and working towards developing more of a growth mindset. We talk about it, and growth mindsets all over the place right now, but it's really, instead of saying, I'm a failure or I suck, I can learn from this, or, I can't do this. Well, I'll need a lot of practice, and I can work at it and plug away at it, and I'll get it. Or I'm not good at this, but yet, right? I'm not good at this yet, right? And so that's growth mindset, and that's really important, and it can take us out of that dark, deep shame place.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
I really like that, Anu, and guilt, shame, dark places. I'm familiar with those, so that hit home for me. I want to just pull over to the Q&A. We do have some questions that are coming in that are really great. Our earlier conversation, we kind of kicked off around how do we create environments where crucial conversations can happen. And a lot of that came back to, knowing ourselves, but also caring about other people. And there's a question here about how do we create, those intentional spaces where we can have organic conversation and really get to know each other at a personal level. Any advice from the panel?
Make space for it.
How, Cami?
And I'm speaking hypothetically because I have been a solopreneur for so long. if there's an expectation of this 10 minutes we're going to share, or this 10 minutes is open to anything, with the understanding that it's okay to share, it's okay to be vulnerable, it's okay to say, you know what, not today. I don't know if that's a time on a schedule, if that's, I don't know, panelists, what do you think?
I think, back to that quote from Harriet Lerner, it just has really carved my path for me, to show up for people and to listen in the way that I desire to be heard. Is just really, it puts me in that right mindset and that right presence to be in the moment. I'm not on my phone. I'm not divided with my attention. I don't have my notifications on my computer. I'm there. I'm zoned in, and I'm really intent on listening in the way that I would desire to be heard if I was receiving that feedback.
Yeah, I think showing up in service to others is also, whenever there's an opportunity for you to show up in service to others, it will always serve you as well.
Mm-hmm.
Always.
Thank you, Cami.
I think one of the best, or one of the, not the best ways, let's go easiest. One of the easiest ways to build a connection with people is to be curious and to ask questions, and then to actually really listen and try this experiments yourselves. Like it's shockingly hard not to talk about yourself, right? It's like I asked Kylie, what's your favorite color? And she tells me it's like purple. I'm like, oh my God, I'm purple too. And then like all of a sudden now we're talking about me. So just trying to be curious and really listening, and not peppering, like you're not having, and it's not an interrogation. It's like, oh, can you expand a little bit more on that idea? Or, you said this thing, I'm curious about it, kind of pulling on those threads. But that really helps build that connection. And I think it kind of goes back to that 5 to 1 and like that trust piece. Because once you have, this goes back all the way to like Arena's first point, where it's like, if you care, like if you show that you care, then the other things become a little bit easier. When you have to withdraw on that piggy bank, you've shown that you're a person who cares, who actually listens. I can remember your kids' names and, the things that are important to you. And so therefore, if I have to deliver some of the not great stuff, or if I don't do something great and you got to deliver some of the not great stuff to me, we have a relationship. It's not going to break us.
Arena, did you?
Oh, well, I'll assume that she wanted me to answer that question. Yeah, just like really practical tips that have worked for me through the pandemic. At the start of every meeting, making space for this discussion and not diving straight into whatever agenda you have. Creating specific time dedicated to social connection. Obviously, you don't want to force everyone to have fun together, but whatever works for your team. Maybe like playing online games together. Yeah, exactly. Mandatory fun. Something that I found works amazingly well. I kind of mentioned earlier how there is an element of vulnerability when you're coming to the situation from your own space. Doing a little tour of where you're dialing in from, that teaches you a lot about someone and their life. And then this is probably not possible in any location right now, but if you're able to, go for a one-on-one walk in person. That does wonders for those connections.
Absolutely. Thank you, Arena and panelists, for weighing in. Next question. I like it. How do we deal with different personality types or someone who seems the opposite of you? I think we've all probably met people that it just feels like we're butting heads with. How do you work with them and have those, vulnerable, crucial conversations?
Those are the best times, because that's when, when the other's heels are dug in and your heels are dug in. It's the best time for vulnerability to come up, because it typically indicates that something core to the essence of your personality or belief system might be feeling threatened. It's that awareness of self. And so adopting that curiosity, having a lot of open, curious questions to better understand their perspective, kind of like that Columbo approach, right? Where you ask a lot of questions. You're trying to solve the mystery of why are they dug in, right? Why are they not seeing it my way, right? Ask those questions out of curiosity, and that person's going to feel heard and softened pretty quickly.
And when you listen with the intent to understand, instead of listening until they stop talking so you can interject, but truly listening with the intent to understand, and then you repeat back what you've heard. It's such a simple thing, but so powerful. If somebody says, listen, I need you to be, working on this thing, and the first thing you want to do is defend yourself or give your reasons. But if you're actually listening with the intent to repeat back, it sounds like you want me to do X, Y, and Z differently. That makes a fantastic connection, and that it deepens the relationship.
Not everyone is open to having a vulnerable conversation or addressing the conflict, though. So how do you gauge when it's a safe place or a safe person to be able to do that with?
Yeah,
that's a really good question.
I think it goes back to that, what we talked about earlier around body language and those maybe nonverbal cues of how someone is showing up. Yeah, Cami is doing a perfect rendition of what that might look like. But then also, if you do kind of see those signals, that you may actually be a little bit off base, and they may be completely open to this conversation. So just gently broach the subject, like, hey, you look like you're frustrated right now. Should we discuss this at another time when you've had some time to process? Is there a better way to engage here?
Mm-hmm. Make flooding your new F word, right? It looks like we're flooded. We need to take a pause. Let's circle back to it after.
Absolutely. Thank you. We've got another question here. Have you ever found yourself at a job where you have tried everything you can to work the situation into a workable solution, but the structure of the company just seems to set up to have you fail? Cami and Paula, you're both nodding. We'll start with Cami.
Yeah, you got to ask yourself if it's actually worth it. If you're going to be spending that much time at this place and you're not being valued, is it worth it to you to stay? And no one else can answer that question for you. That's something you really have to ask yourself. I have this a grid that I use. It's just a 2x2 square, 4 squares together. At the top is best case scenario, worst case scenario, if you do or if you don't. So if you're thinking, all right, what if the question is, should I stay? Best case scenario if you do, best case scenario if you don't. Worst case scenario if you do, worst case scenario if you don't. Once you fill something like that out, it's going to be really obvious whether you should stay or not.
Grid.
But yeah, value yourself enough to think, is it worth it for me to stay here? Is it worth my mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, and creative health to stay? If the answer may be yes, and it might, you might dig your heels in and get creative on solving some issues, but it might be time to move on.
Paula, what are your thoughts here?
I don't think I have anything to add in terms of that situation. I think, full disclosure, my husband is sitting just over my shoulder, and he's a management consultant, so he also loves a good 2x2, and he's very happy with that resource, Cami. But I will say, if you decide to go, or actually if you decide to stay, and I feel like I'm beating a drum here, but going back to that idea of really learning about yourself, and not every place is where you're meant to be. And, I think about some of the places, I happen to know for myself, like, I'm a builder. I love building things. As soon as I have to be like the detail oriented, like repetitive person, that just kills my soul. And so, but there's folks out there who love that. If you love, rules and process, there's going to be companies that are great for that. And if you love the kind of the Wild West, you're going to find other places as well. And it's like, a job is no different than a relationship. Not everybody is for you, and not every job or company or industry or place where that company is in at the time in that industry is for you. And so once you've applied Cami's 4x4 or 2x2, do that work so that you make the best choice next for yourself. And also don't mix up things being difficult with things being impossible. Sometimes doing the hard work is worth it.
Thank you, Paula. And you or Rena, anything else to add to that question? No, we're good. Okay. I do like, Cami, your point about, sometimes we need to weigh out these tough emotional conversations, and we don't always need to have them all the time. We can be selective in how we have them and how we choose to spend that energy. So thank you for that reminder. I'm going to do one more question because I think it's quite interesting here, and then we'll wrap up the Q&A period. But what if you're not a touchy-feely and people want you to talk about your feelings? Is that just something that's just how you are, or can it be improved and developed? Anu, do you want to maybe start us off with this one?
Sure. Yeah. No, we don't come out of the womb knowing how to communicate. We learn, right? We learn through our early experiences, and we really can't grow and learn unless we get uncomfortable. So it's an invitation to discomfort, and discomfort is not to be confused with not feeling safe. Always ensure you're feeling safe. But if you're feeling safe but yet uncomfortable, trust that you're in a good place and you're in an opportunity of growth to really start kind of expanding on that feelings. And if you look online, there's a feelings wheel that you can Google, very easily accessible. It can be a really nice anchor. It can be a really helpful guide to find the right words to capture what you're experiencing in your body.
Cool, thank you, Anu. Anyone else on the panel want to add on that?
I will add on that feelings are not binary. There's kind of spectrums and there's intensities to them. And, you know, if I want to sit down and talk with you lovely folks about your feelings, I'm not necessarily ready to have a therapy session with you. I might actually just be wondering if you're frustrated. And so it's, you know, you can take these little baby steps into having some of those conversations so that you can feel comfortable, but you're still exploring that realm, because let's be honest, even if you're not a touchy-feely person, you still are sometimes frustrated. You're still sometimes upset. You're still sometimes happy or puzzled by something. And it doesn't have to be like the big emotions. And I love that wheel. It's super, you know, if you're like, but I don't know anything other than like, you know, like really big emotions, get this wheel because it'll show you those little like narrow emotions.
Yeah.
Nice. I have a little something to add to that. I'm doing an art experiment online on Wednesday night, where you process emotions and it's called Processing Emotions of 2020 with crayons. Because for years and years I was taught that expressing any negative emotions was just not cool. And I crammed them into a bottle and I put the cork on, and God forbid someone should bump the bottle because then everybody would get sprayed. And I realized through the coaching work that I received that it's okay to be angry. It's okay to be frustrated. It's okay to feel those things. What's not okay is hurting other people with them. And so in this art experiment, we're going to be taking crayons and dipping into some of the emotions that 2020 left us with, and just playing them out with something as safe and familiar as crayons. And I encourage art and I encourage journaling as any way to process the negative emotions before they spray on everybody else. They're a good, safe way to figure out what it is you're feeling. And maybe there's a reason behind that, and maybe a reason behind that, and maybe a reason behind that, to figure out what's really going on. And going back to Paula's point is self-awareness.
Thank you, Cami. Are there any final thoughts from the panelists? Any advice you want to share, or you know, a thought that triggered throughout this discussion that you want to leave the audience with before we wrap up the official panel discussion?
Go ahead.
Yes, actually, I have one.
I feel like this is
Arena,
the
you go
first
first.
only time where somebody, like two people started talking at the same time. So I feel like, you know, virtual life isn't virtual life with at least one of those situations. I just have a fairly small practical tip. Personally, I'm very much a pleaser. And so for me, the difficulty with sharing difficult feedback or engaging in this conversation is I start spinning about how the person's going to receive it and react. And to Paula's earlier point around planning, I think also a successful thing for me has been write down what I expect the reaction will be. And then once I've delivered the feedback, compare the reality with with the story I told myself in my head. And I think as you do this more and more over time, you'll see that it's not, you know, they usually take it completely fine and they appreciate it, and it's a really productive conversation. and you can stop kind of, or at least try to quiet those stories that you tell yourself.
That's funny that you should mention stories, because that's what I was going to talk about.
Perfect.
Talk about being on the same wavelength. Good segue. The stories that we tell ourselves oftentimes aren't true. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. My work's not good enough. And you really have to evaluate the stories that you are telling yourself, especially if you're a woman, because they're not rooted. And being your past self is not going to serve your future self. So if you think about the kind of person you want to become, and instead of being just interested, actually commit to being that kind of person, that future self, and you're going to be much better off. Lead from a place of love, and it's going to serve you, your long-term goals, the whole shebang.
Thank you, Cami. Oh, I just it hit me about the stories I tell myself, and I'm going to be thinking about that one after the panel. Paula, do you have any last words to add?
I do. I would love to challenge everybody in the audience to do this one thing. When we think about difficult conversations or feedback, we often think about the negative. And you all know how much I love to practice. Go and practice giving somebody in your life specific positive feedback. Why try it? Why start at the level 10? We need to have that conversation. No, start at level 1 and 2, where it's hey, you know what, Kylie, you did a really great job bringing together 4 of us from this panel, and you prepared us really well for that. Thank you. Nobody is going to get upset if you do a bad job of positive feedback. The worst thing that happens is they get a virtual high five. So just practice the feedback, practice all of these tips with the positive stuff.
I love that, Paula. And that ties into today's International Women's Day theme, which is choose to challenge. So the audience takeaway here is choose to challenge the hard conversations by practicing with the easy ones. That's a great takeaway. Thank you.
Love that.
Anu, why don't you wrap us up with your last thing to share?
Well, I love that the theme for this year is choose to challenge, because I feel like, in order for us to grow, we have to challenge ourselves. We have to invite discomfort, but to also remember that we're wired. We are hardwired to do hard things. We are resilient human beings. We have to embrace the suck. We have to embrace the awful and validate those emotions, but we also have to remember that we're resilient. We can do hard things, but we can do hard things a lot easier when we're connected to our people. So connection is currency. It's really important.
Absolutely. And I feel like we've had some really awesome connection in this panel conversation. So thank you all for sharing your stories, your experiences. It really ranged from, theory all the way down to personal experience, practical tips. We covered a range today. So thank you for sharing that insight with the audience. Audiences, for those of you who did ask questions and we didn't get to them, stick around after. There will be some discussions and roundtable opportunities to connect with the panelists and have those conversations. So know that we will be getting to those later in the event. I do want to just say one final thank you for all of the insight shared and the time today from the panelists. So round of applause. Thank you everyone for being here. I'm going to wrap up with a few closing remarks. So panelists, if you could turn off your mics and your video, we'll say closing remarks and we'll get into the networking. Thank you. All right, that was an amazing conversation. My heart is full. And I also, in addition to thanking our wonderful panelists, I also want to recognize Platform Calgary, who was our lovely event sponsor. They provided us with the Remo platform so we could have a really engaging event tonight. Shout out to Louise and Calgary UX for being our behind the scenes tech, initiating this collaboration event and leading the promotion and event management. We do have a survey link that will be coming out in the chat. So if you want to just look for that, we would really appreciate a couple minutes of your time to get some feedback, learn about your thoughts from the event. Feedback helps us improve and be better as we move forward. So thank you in advance for filling that out for us. Oop, forgot the photo. Shoot. Panelists, are you still here? Will you unmute and come back on camera? We needed a group photo and I forgot. Thank you. All right. Louise is in charge of taking the photo. So I will count us down. 3, 2, 1, smile. All right. I think he got it. Thank you. Nothing more awkward like taking a virtual photo as a panelist. Thank you all. All right, you can turn those videos and those mics back off. All right, so if you want to stay connected to Chic Geek, we encourage you to check out our website, join our mailing list. Email, newsletters are kind of the best way to stay in touch with us. And if you want to stay in touch with Calgary UX, the amazing community, there's lots of places you can do that, from the website, Slack, Meetup, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We are going to move into the networking portion of tonight's event. So when you entered the event, you would have noticed there are tables, and we have 15 different tables. The first 4 are for our panelists, so they will be opportunities for you to chat with any one of the panelists about the conversation tonight or ask some of your questions. We also have discussion topics listed in tiny, tiny print underneath the tables. So if you zoom, you can see those a little bit more clearly, and you're welcome to hop into different tables, discussions. We encourage you to turn on your mic and your camera. That's how you can actually have a small group discussion with other individuals at your table. There's also 2 tables, one to connect with Chic Geek if you have any questions, and another table for Calgary UX. And on the left side, we have 2 tables for any introverts in the room who just need to take a social break. You can turn off your mic, your camera, and not feel obligated to talk to anyone while you're at the introvert tables. So we will end this portion of the event, move into open networking. You're welcome to stick around, but if you need to go, we totally understand. We hope to see you at the next Chic Geek or Calgary UX event, and we hope that you do find some really amazing conversations at the discussion tables. So thank you so much for joining us, everyone, and we'll see you on the discussion floor.